Okay, here we are back again with another Candid Craic. On the other side of the ocean, we have Rose. How are you doing?
Fine, Oscar. How are you doing?
Very well. And Richards, how are you?
Equally well, Oscar. Thank you.
Excellent. So today, we're going to talk with Rose. And before we start, do you mind to kind of explain a little bit about what you do at the moment?
So good question. I'm just finishing 36 years of service in the public service of Canada. So I'm very much in transition. It was a interesting career, ups and downs. I had lots of opportunities to do many things for Canadians and staff in my own organization. And now I'm because of the pandemic, I would have preferred to have traveled and done things that I didn't have more time to get to. But I'm doing reading, writing. I'm looking at some small contracts. There's one that I'm working on now. So it's very much a period of transition. They say that, in the first year of retirement, you need to sort of sit back and not jump into anything. This is an unusual year. I didn't think I would be, doing what I am doing right now.
What? Oh, yeah. What about your background, Rose? Because you kind of skipped that a little bit because you went
Okay.
straight into retirement. But
And as you can see, I usually don't like to talk about myself. That's an interesting. So I'm an immigrant to Canada many years ago. I came when I was 2 years old. My parents are originally from India. My father, he's passed on. It's been 13 years. He was a professor, um, a PhD in philosophy. So he taught comparative education. And my mom, still alive. I actually live with my mom. She was a nurse, and she's been retired for, of course, a number of years. I have a brother and his wife and two nieces. So that's my family. I've lived in many parts of Canada, not every part, but I've visited and worked in every part, virtually or physically. And I'm a great traveler, and I'm very curious. I love to learn. So that's a little bit about me. I don't know if you want to know anything else.
So just a little bit about when you've worked in the government for 36 years. So what did you do? What departments were you in? What kind of work were you doing there?
So I joined in the finance stream. At the time, I was just finishing off a bachelor's of commerce. And that particular year, I still remember there was a freeze in the government, meaning they wouldn't be hiring anyone. But National Defense is where I started. They decided to hire two people, and I was one of them. So I started in finance, worked my way to audit, and then my boss at the time said, you should expand your horizons. And so I went to the Treasury Board. I've also worked at Environment Canada. I worked up north in the Yukon, which is near Alaska, doing community justice. I've worked in immigration, so and on the side of integrating immigrants to Canada, the social supports for that. I worked with Indigenous peoples in business development. I've also worked in HR in technology. That was my last position.
So before we sort of move into chatting about that last one, because I know you've got a project we're going to talk about in the wellbeing space, are there any of those that stood out as being particularly interesting and highlights in the career? Because that's a very broad spectrum of stuff that you've done.
That's a really good question, because every place I was, there was something I took away. Probably the most adventurous for me was actually moving to the Yukon. Everyone, when I said that I was doing that, thought, "Wow, your career is going to be derailed, and you need to be in Ottawa." And I just felt it was really important for me, as a public servant, as a Canadian, to live in an area that was quite different. Yukon is extremely beautiful, lots of mountains, lots of nature, number of Indigenous peoples live there. And I was, again, a real opportunity and fortunate to have worked and be welcomed by them to understand how they live. And my perspective on Indigenous peoples, like anyone who's worked in those communities, is quite different than someone who hasn't had exposure to that. Their challenges, there are great opportunities, their successes. So that's probably the one that, is near and dear to my heart.
So what? Just to stay with that for a second, what do you think the difference is, having worked with them, than people who only see them from afar or read about them in the media? What's the essence of that experience?
So when I was there, I was with in Canada, each province or territory has their own level of government. So I was working for the territorial government. But I was there they had asked me to do a review of community justice. So I quickly realized what I was accustomed to when I was in Ottawa was having a lot of supports. I could call so-and-so. I didn't know anybody. I went there not knowing anybody. And the relationships, I had to, form those. And particularly, so, within a government context, perhaps it was a little easier. We kind of knew how to work together. But my work was primarily speaking to people in the communities. And I still remember one incident. It was a group of women, elders, plus young people. And, I came in and did my usual spiel about, why I was here and what I was going to do. And I still remember this one lady, an elder. She said, what are you going to do for us? You don't know anything. You're from the South. And, I'm in the North. So I thought South. This is the first time I'd heard this. And she was really, very aggressive, and you don't know anything, and you don't know how we live. So there was a couple of choices there for me to do. Either walk out of that meeting and say, okay, I'm wasting your time, or let's talk about that. So I decided to say, you're right. I will never claim to say that I know your experiences. I'm very fortunate to have been educated, come from a loving family, had many, other opportunities. But what I can promise to you is that I will listen to you, take note of what you said. And, my role was to bring those views as part of the work that I was doing. And that's all I can promise to do. So it started to warm up a little bit. And we had a discussion, probably a couple of hours. And I was just me. I was not, and that's who I am. I was friendly. I was just listening. I was empathetic, my usual characteristics. And at the end of that meeting, this particular lady walked up to me, and I thought, oh, she's going to say something more. And she actually hugged me. It still brings tears to my eyes, because it was, they saw that I wasn't there. I didn't have an agenda per se, but I was very much there to listen to them. And so I learned in that particular role, being who you are, and listening, really listening, and accommodating and adjusting to your audience was even much more important. And I didn't have anyone to kind of support me, or usual administration. It was me who was doing that. Real great experience.
Wonderful. I mean, it was quite interesting. I know when you talked about the wellbeing work you did, you actually almost described some of the IT workers that you were managing as equally isolated from everyone else as these sort of people in the Yukon. I mean, that seems an interesting parallel to sort of start off talking about wellbeing, in that the one IT member is embedded somewhere else in the middle of nowhere, and you've got to look after their wellbeing. So can you talk to us a little bit about that Wellbeing project that sort of was, it seems like it was a very big project towards the end of your career, of your government career, at least.
Yes, and it was when, as I'd explained in the presentation, when we had put it into place, it was very much the public service trying to bring this, give it some prominence. So, and my role was to do it for my department, which was about 7 employees. Luckily, very fortunately, we had a number of other organizations or institutions that had done a lot of research in this area. And there's the Mental Health Commission and their 13 psychological factors. And when I saw this, it resonated with me immediately. And so how to put this in place, as you say, with very technical personnel. It took some time to explain that their work is perhaps more hard and tangible, whereas mental health is something about yourself and your well-being, and to give examples of where this could show up in their life. And so the factors go from leadership expectations all the way to civility and respect. And how we implemented was to show examples in a technology setting or a technological sector, what this looks like, and to apply it to that particular context. I'm proud that we at least put the foundational elements there. This was a few years ago, and now with the pandemic, it's even more important because you hear about it, of course, and everyone's experiencing some sort of mental wellness issue, and there's a whole range that you could be experiencing. Some are much more extreme than others, and so I'm glad that at least it's there to help our employees.
So can you give some examples of some of this training that you showed these the employees? What it looks like, etc.
So we put in place. There's the program. Here are the terminology. So there was. When people think about mental health or mental wellness, they think about the most extreme. You're seeing a trained professional. You're maybe perhaps taking some medication, but in fact, it's a range of things. So at the other end of the spectrum, it's you get up one day and you're just not feeling yourself, or it's just not you're not clear-headed, or you're feeling a little anxious, or you're nervous about whatever's going on. And then you go to the middle where it's even more turbulent. And so when we were able to show that there's a spectrum, that really helped. We also talked about the stigma of this whole area, and a lot of education and training. So we had a couple of courses. So there was that formal training. But perhaps what was, and I don't know if other departments did this, we put in a network of what we called mental health ambassadors. So 7,000 people, it just can't be Rose and her small team doing that. We did kind of train the trainer sessions and created networks in each of the branches that could, do their own activities. We would support them. And this would be, of course, we were across the country and within each branch. So that was perhaps a little different than what others perhaps would have done. And then, there'd be, special events every month. And more people would talk about this as well. So then it became acceptable to have these conversations.
So you sort of said clusters of people. So is this like a tight network of people that were in these various different locations, so that you had this ability for them to replicate the ideas and to reference the ideas with each other, etc. So that it wasn't one person feeling alone with all the burden on their shoulders.
No. So what we did is we sent out a call out asking who would be interested. And then, you know, most people who volunteered, we accepted their application and then gave them some training and supported them. So as you say, it was not just one person, it might be a couple of people within a particular branch. Or if someone was by themselves, we'd make sure that they perhaps teed up with another branch. So there was never anyone alone. And what came of this, and so we put in, you know, supports and programs, but I was pleased to see, and this is the way it should be, they would take initiative to put things in place that, you know, have talks or have activities that we had not thought of. And so collectively, it was a very rich set of initiatives and activities.
So that's also interesting. So you've got these this reinforcing network of people that are talking to each other, either with small groups or you know, even across departments, because there's only one in one. But then a bunch of experiments that are going on that they're all running separately. What was you know, as the central coordinator all of this, you know, when you heard about successful talks or experiments, what would you do?
So we would communicate them. You know, we had a lot of communication through social media or within the department. We would highlight them as, you know, success stories or stories to showcase what they were doing. And in any kind of employee town hall or event that perhaps our senior management have, we would showcase this. And at that time we had physical presence, so you could have a kiosk and show what others had done. There was certainly ways to share this. Or, you know, near the end, there were some people who were even more interested in this. So we would, you know, make those connections between those people. So those are the ways that, you know, we would have made it much more visible and much more acceptable to have these events.
And it also sounds, sorry, it just sounds incredibly decentralized, which is really interesting, because that's not what I would have had in my mind for government service.
Yeah, well, it had to be. Now there was some sort of reporting. We'd keep in touch because I had to report, how's the program doing? You know, are we meeting what we presented to senior management in terms of awareness about networking? At one point, and this was near the end of my stint there, we tried to match the mental health factors to what we were hearing in engagement surveys, and to see if there was a crosswalk. And that was more data for these ambassadors and managers to use. So it sounds like a well-oiled machine, but you know, we go out to 8 branches, everything kind of flows up, and people were happy to talk about this because it was successful. And you know, the number of trainings, we could keep track of that, the courses. So there was some sort of measurement at the end, particularly the stories that we wanted to showcase.
And the impact on the stigmatization, you know, was that powerful as well?
I think so. We had a couple of senior people, because, you know, you have to role model this, talk about their experiences at town halls or even through social media. And what they experienced, and I thought that was quite powerful. And so now, if I were to go back and talk about this, no one would bat an eye. They think, okay, this is just part of, you know, our day-to-day work.
And so you said your department was quite unusual in it being this decentralized. It wasn't. So can you compare how well your department did this compared to, in terms of impact, compared to maybe some of the others in
I don't have that information, but I do know that some, for example, they would integrate the work with one department. They had a mental health ombudsman. So the ombudsman function and mental health were put together, which I thought was an interesting combination. Whereas, let's say in others, it was much more formal training and less networking. Some departments had, like badges that you could, they called it not myself today. So if, let's say I was not, today I was feeling inspired. So you put a button on yourself, inspired. So there was, things like that others might have done. But I'm not, no one sort of stuck out as doing something quite different than us. They were, just running the program, doing the training, but the ambassador network, I think, was quite unique.
I mean, it's quite fascinating, the notion of a sort of decentralized wellbeing network. I mean, I think that's really quite powerful. And it would be, and it's a shame you don't have the data, because it would be two things I find really interesting. Is one how much more impact yours had than a centralized top-down talk to the experts kind of thing. But two, I'd be really interested in because you've got all of these different experiments going along in the civil service, because they're all doing things differently. Mm-hmm. Where was the overall coordination to see what worked? Because if you actually had someone sitting on top of it and going, oh, this works or that works or this doesn't work, you would then be able to scale it. Was anything like that going on?
Well, so the public service employee survey, which I mentioned, every department or all the employees respond to that. And there is a central organization, the Treasury Board, that can analyze all the data across the public service. Now, our department, relatively new, we were not always at the high. We're getting up there, but we were, quite young in terms of what we had put in place for many different things. It's not just mental health. So this analysis of the survey results against the mental health factors was something that they took on, and they provided that to departments to then do further analysis. So I don't have that data as to how we compared, but within our department, I believe the managers found that helpful, because it was more data with to look at. And if, I don't know, let's say one of the factors, having clear expectations and roles and responsibilities was red, then you as a manager knew that you had to do more work on that. Or if civility and respect, I'm looking at the other end of the spectrum, was an issue, well, maybe we need to have some more training, or I need to be more clear in my expectations around this. So it was a good guide for the managers to work with their groups to improve the wellness of their work and their workplace.
The thing I'm interested in as well, Rose, is more about the kind of, let's say, evolution or transformation of the practices. So you spoke about workshops that you introduced, and what I understand, it was a fairly long program that you were responsible for. Can you tell a bit more about how you shaped that within the organization, how that changed that over time, or was it pretty much from the start you started with something that didn't change?
So there's I don't want to call it a formula. I've done other programs, and so what are you trying to achieve? What do you need in terms of inputs? What are some of the, including the activities, and then what kind of outcomes you're trying to achieve? In this case, and anything I've done, I don't go in this. It's kind of weaving through, and you kind of step back and change things. The psychological factors was a starting point. If I didn't have that, that would have been a lot of work. But how to actually implement that in our organization, there had to be some thinking around how to do that. First of all, what did it mean? So you could just say, here's 13 psychological factors, and we need to pay attention to that. I think what was different in our case is that we adapted it to our context, or thought about our context, because the Mental Health Commission published them, but it was never, I don't think, intended that someone just grab it and put it in place. So in our technological department, clear expectations might be quite different than, I don't know, an environmental department. Technology is changing, every 4 months. There's expectations from all our partner departments. It's very fast paced. It's not necessarily clear. So, the expectations are perhaps as best as they can be. Whereas, let's say, an environment which has been around for a number of years, there's science, there's, a number of initiatives there that have come before, probably less erratic, less turbulence. It would be a different set of expectations that you can, and standards that you could adhere to. So that took a little, thinking through, so that we didn't feel that this was something that was not applicable to us. And it's still being improved as once it was put in place. I remember, to Richard's point, some of the activities, some of the branches would focus on one particular theme. So let's say it's workload management. Well, everyone has that issue, but let's say that's one that they wanted to focus on. So we made it so flexible that here's a bigger picture, but you can, depending on what's going on in your branch, you could actually focus on a particular issue. And we were fine with if only a few things were being addressed, because we considered it to be a journey, not to be one and done kind of thing. So that was probably different than any other program where I've run. It's very methodical, it's sequential. Maybe there's a little bit of review and then you start again, but this was more organic. Anyway, that's how it felt when we were putting it in place.
I think everything you mentioned, there's an element of well-being in the activity as well. I mean, you get the option to choose what you want to explore. Mm-hmm. So there's this sense of agency in the team, mm-hmm. which of course drives well-being in the first place. So I get to, no one's telling me that it's this that I'm bad at. I'm actually choosing and we're exploring it. So, I mean, was that part of your thinking, or was it something that bubbled up over time?
I don't think explicitly. There, like I said, there's 13 psychological factors, and my experience in government, you can't do everything at once. So you can lay out, here's what there is, and then maybe focus on one or two or three. We never explicitly said that, but I think, again, having that data near the end, if I'd had that at the beginning, perhaps I would have had a different journey or a different way of proposing that this be implemented. But that's the thing. These employees answered these surveys, and it didn't surprise me that some of the factors bubbled up compared to others, because it coincided or aligned with what was being said in the surveys. So, workload management, probably civility and respect, taking care of people, so growth, development, recognition, those probably were the top three. If you were to do the same thing today, I would suggest that physical safety, that is one of the factors, would probably be the one that comes up. People are concerned about, being in the workplace, making sure they're protected and they have the supports that they need. So we didn't plan it that way. We didn't say this one or that one, but it developed that way.
So I've got one last question on well-being, and then Oscar, please interrupt me if you've got any more. And that's if knowing all of this data, and if you were going to start it now, what would you do differently?
Well, I would have had the public service results, and so we could have done a deeper dive and made it even more relevant to every branch. Here we were kind of, having discussions and talking to managers, but we can show them data and, give them a suggested path forward. I'm not saying that's any better than the way we did it before, but it might be, maybe it would have gone even faster because they could see the results. And remember, these results were always shared with senior management. There was a dashboard. And so thinking about senior management, they wanted to ensure that across the board that there was work being done to address some of the gaps in well-being. So that's what I probably would have done differently. And then I don't know if the networks would have evolved, given that we had the data, whereas before we didn't. So the networks kind of took precedence over anything else. So if you were to ask me, I think the way we did it the first time, probably there was more buy-in. If you have people talking about it, they're engaged, they know this is important, and then you can provide the data and say, well, here's some more information to help you do your work.
That's fascinating. So almost not knowing allowed for that experimental exploration of the network, which might have produced better results. And you sort of had all the data and said, oh, I will just do this because that seems to be really interesting. Thank you, Rose. Do you have any more questions in this space, Oscar?
Well, of course, the networking part, right? What I'm very fascinated by is how you kind of keep people engaged, because it's quite difficult. Well, running a workshop in itself is not an easy task, but what were you doing to kind of keep that engagement among the employees? Because if you just run one workshop, doesn't mean it's going to be successful. So I'm quite curious about how you were doing this.
So I don't think I did anything to keep the engagement going. I think it's those individuals within the network, because this usually meant something. For some of them, it was very personal. They had experienced real trauma in their life, and they saw the impact that work could have to either make that worse or not worse. We had enough people who were interested in this topic and saw the value in this topic and this issue, and so they carried on. Now, I'm not saying they had a meeting every month and it was clockwork, but there was some sort of continuity when it made sense, and they implemented it in different ways. They might have had monthly get together, or maybe every quarter they would get together. We didn't dictate that. It whatever would fit for that particular organization. Again, if I had some data and knowing a little bit more about the branches, did some networking different from others? That would have been an interesting thing to look at. But this case, we gave the supports, but it was the individuals themselves who saw the importance, and that for me was success, because I'm not one to. We need to be there all the time. It should evolve, and as if we were never there, that this is now ingrained into the organization.
If you don't mind, what was the scope of that particular program, or how many people were? I mean, because this was at government level, right? So how big was this?
So I at the time I probably had 3 to 5 staff. It wasn't a very big team. Again, we had support from the center. They had a lot of material from the Mental Health Commission. We didn't have to reinvent the wheel. And so it wasn't a big team. I had 300 employees. This was one of my programs that I had to put in place. And so the networks were kind of our extended team. And so that really helped in putting this in place.
The thing I want to move on to now, Rose, and you've mentioned it a couple of times, civility and respect as one end of the continuum. And because you were head of HR of IT, so there are 2 things related to that. One, nobody notices IT until there's a problem. And then they come at IT all guns blazing. Yeah, so that's an important bubble. And so and the second time I was actually running an IT team a number of years ago, and I was off work ill, and I got an email and then a phone call from the IT team, and the lady I sat next to in the office had called them up because there was a problem, and they phoned me up and they said, I recognise being abused as part of our job, but we have never been spoken like this ever. in 20 years of doing this, please stop this from happening again, because it was just vicious. So and that sort of the experience. And then I also had IT teams in different locations fighting each other over control of different parts of the project and things like that. So civility and respect is both core and incredibly difficult, because they are getting shouted at and abused and blamed, and they're not getting any praise. So let's talk about that. How did you approach that element of the job?
So I think any service organization, so IT, HR, perhaps finance, and the corporate functions, they encounter this. And by the way, our entire department, we were servicing 43 other departments. So we were a big service organization. And so, yes, in fact, when I joined the organization for my very own group, I made it mandatory that everyone take some training around values and ethics, and respect was part of that training, because I wanted to make sure that we were respectful to one another. And then we were equipped to how do you deal with disrespect from the clients. So that's one form of, making sure that at least some are on the page. And then, by the way, this training was rolled out to the entire department. So that took a couple of years. It was a workshop. There'd be here's some definitions. So again, ranging from not being kind to someone and speaking with disrespect to, actual harassment, which is, by the way, gauged in the survey that I spoke about before. And so lots of intel would come out of those workshops as well. What do we need to focus on for future workshops or future discussions? We had the typical policies. We had training, but most importantly, so I can speak to what I would do if I would convey to my staff that disrespect, any kind of harassment was not acceptable. And if that happened, they were to let me know immediately. And I would, have a little chat with the person concerned or their manager. And I know many people didn't believe that I would actually do that, but the first time it happened and I actually did it, and I would use it as an opportunity to educate. So I'd call the manager, usually it was the manager, and just say, this happened. Look, we're really trying hard. We don't have the resources. We don't have the tools. What is it exactly that you want? I know you're under the gun. You're expected to deliver, but so are we. And how can we work on this together? But let's do it with respect, speaking, kindly, speaking, and being understand your emotions, but we're all trying to work on the same outcome. So word got around that I would actually do that with my own staff, and so it became less and less that staff would encounter that themselves. But I also, as anyone, everything that goes wrong is the head of HR. So that would happen to me in open forums. I still remember my first presentation, September 4th, 24th. I was new to the department. I was talking about what we're going to put in place in terms of workplace management and workforce management. And, usual presentation, and somebody got up and started screaming and yelling at me. And I was mortified in front of, all our executives. And
someone more powerful than you or less powerful than you?
Well, I didn't know who she was. Okay. I was new. So
right. Okay, fair enough.
It wasn't, I don't think, no, I would have known they were not more senior to me, but I wasn't sure if she was a colleague or, a more junior person. We were all executives, so I couldn't tell. So I just listened, and nobody was sort of stepping up to say, Rose is new, and so she well taken or anything. So I thought, okay, I'll just do it on my own. And I just said, I acknowledge, again, similar to that, what happened to me in the North, I acknowledge that you're feeling frustrated. Thank you for sharing this information with me. What I can do is only work on something going forward. I can't address the past because I wasn't there, but I can give you my commitment that I will resolve this issue in the time that I'm here. And she sat down and I went back to my chair, and no, everyone was looking at me, and I thought, oh my goodness, what did I walk into here? But what I did in retrospect was just be calm, listen. I was probably just as upset, but I didn't show it. And then a few weeks later, the president of the organization, he called me and he said, "You really handled that really well." And he reassured me that, I'll support you in trying to fix this issue. And he also, and I give him credit for this, talked to that particular individual and reassured her that he heard what she had to say, because he's ultimately responsible. So those are examples of how to show how to be respectful. And don't get me wrong, I inside I was, upset, angry, what's going on here. But, given my role, I had to role model how to say this is not acceptable. All I can do is, work on the future.
So the role modeling, it seems core to this, that you're role modeling from the top, but also, so first of all, a question that I'm not quite clear about, when you were talking about the role modeling and stepping in when there was disrespect shown with your team, was that from external external departments, or was that just within the team?
Initially, it was external departments. Near the end of my stint, I actually had a very serious case where there was conflict within within my own group. And I had to, well, there was actually a couple of instances throughout the tenure, and I would have informal conflict resolution, I had a real open door. Anyone could come and talk to me. And so just to make sure that there was always conversation going. In probably most of the cases, there was a decision to part ways, but at least there was some effort to try to get to the nub of the issue.
So role modeling, exercise of power, to an extent, is that you're looking after you're in a more powerful position, and you were protecting the powerless from these external agents who were. But they were surprised that you would do that. That was, you sort of framed that. Why do you think they were surprised? What is there some kind of brutalist regime that tends to go on? That
I think I've seen it. Some leaders won't say anything. They won't do anything. I think they and you said it, HR and IT, there's an expectation that there's abuse, and no one will do anything about it. And so I think that's why they were surprised that I actually said what I meant. And I've heard that comment quite a few times. So, if you expect it all the time, sometimes you might not even say anything to anybody. Because I would always say, if I don't know what's going on, you don't tell me, I can't do anything about it. And I really meant that. So I really tried to create these open avenues so that personnel could come and see me, both inside and outside the organization.
So there was deep trust involved then as well. That you built up a trust in your employees that you would go and take a stand for them.
Yeah, that probably took some effort on my part. I wasn't from HR, so they didn't know me. I was probably the first time. Well, when I it wasn't a very diverse group. So, when I walked in, they probably all thought, how did she get this job? I did hear those comments. And so I just was myself, and I surrounded myself with a very good team. My directors made sure that they, not that they were the same to me, but they had sort of the same core values, and they were not afraid to speak up, but with respect. So building that kind of trust, I still, again, near probably the middle of my tenure there, one of my directors said, you're going to be speaking at the town hall. Why don't you talk about you, Rose? And as you know, I don't like to do that much. And I said, why? And she says, well, we want to know the real you. We know you, are you the directors? Remember, I had 300 employees. They should see the real you. And so I said, okay, I can tell a stories. And the theme for this particular town hall was respect and discrimination and harassment. That was we're going to have workshops around our day. So I gave a speech that I thought I never give about some experiences that I had in college, in high school, in university, and then to this day, and how I, overcame some of those challenges, not just on my own, but with supports from, relationships that I had, and just how I learned how to, stand up for myself. And so that she thought it was fantastic. She said, yeah, people just saw the real you. And I became more comfortable then talking about myself and sharing about myself. And so then, what that does, others start to share about their own experiences because they feel there's someone who can perhaps empathize and sympathize with them.
So, I mean, that's yes, it's role modeling again to an extent. It's I'm going out there and I'm going to be vulnerable and tell you stories I'm not comfortable telling because I think they're important, and then others would do the same thing.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and that's a difficult, role modeling. You can do with just theoretically, but for me, I always drew upon my experiences, and I always would think, how did I feel? Well, and sometimes I didn't want to remember some of these things, but again, I've learned over time, whatever did happen, it was actually the best for me, and I was able to share that with others, and so it opened, many avenues. It helped others become stronger because they could see that it is possible. It doesn't have to destroy you. It doesn't have to, they can be more stability from that. But I was also honest that sometimes that wouldn't happen, and so need to regroup. And so it's those ups and downs, the successes and failures that we don't talk too much about in the workplace. And I really believe that you learn more from failure than from, or something that didn't go well than when it was quite successful.
What were some of the experiences that you shared, Rose? You mentioned about the speech that you prepared and that you describing the personal challenges that you had and the experience. Do you mind sharing that a little bit?
Yeah, so one of them, well, you probably don't know, I'm not a very tall person because we're always sitting in.
Yeah, we've only ever seen you on a Zoom screen, so we have no idea.
So I'm probably 5'3", yeah, 5'2", 5'3". So in high school, I played basketball. And I wanted to participate in sports. And by the way, I'm not an athletic person, but I wanted to be part of activities. And I still, we were in a game, and we're playing basketball, going back and forth. And so we were at another school, and someone called me. It was a racial slur, and I was, you're in the heat of the moment, but and by the way, I was able to score a hoop. I got it right through the hoop. But what, I didn't remember that until later. It was what someone called me. And I was crying. How old was I? Probably 12 or 13. Yeah, 13, 14. I was crying. I just didn't understand. This was supposed to be, we're all young, we're playing sports, it's about the game. And my coach was very, very empathetic, very sympathetic. My teammates, they were great. So I felt a lot better, but it sticks with you. And I was so angry at myself that I didn't, go and confront this person. But I was too afraid. And I thought, oh, why do I look so different? If I looked like everybody else, my life would be so much easier. I wouldn't get the name calling. And by the way, this is not the first time that happened, but it was this incident that I shared with my employees. So fast forward to university days, and I was studying science at the beginning of my university tenure in biology, but I always loved art and drawing and writing. And so in my spare time, I would go to the museums. We were right downtown, and look at, the latest art exhibit. And I would tell my friends this. Now, remember, they're all studying science. They're, very different kind of mindset. And some of them would start to make fun of me. And so I said, well, why don't you come with me? Why don't you come and see what this is like? So I was proud of myself, what I was telling my staff. Instead of, getting upset about that and then them saying I was different and weird, I actually said, well, why don't you come along with me and see what this is like? So not everyone took me up on it. A few did. And they did come with me, and they, of course, enjoyed it very much. And so we would make it a regular outing when there was a new exhibit in town. And then, fast forward to the workplace. I didn't share any specific incidents, but I always shared that I shared that being different was actually, I began to learn that it was really an asset. Whether and how I look, how I thought, how I interacted. So continue to be different, which is not where I started when I was a young kid. So I wanted to show that journey. And again, this was in the context of what we were talking about, respect and acknowledging people's differences and celebrating them. I was trying to give real examples on how to do this.
And this is sort of the work you're doing now, isn't it? So you've transferred into advisory on diversity, equity, and inclusion. So is that the final passion? Is you've done the respect and civility and well-being, and you're now sort of bringing it all together in that big DEI space.
Yeah, the diversity and inclusion area is very diverse. There's a whole industry, as you know, both you and Richard know that, just like leadership, Oscar, this is like, there's a blooming industry. For me, though, it's all about belonging. We all want to belong. And that's the ultimate outcome. But how do we get there? And again, before this talk, I was thinking about, the work that I'm going to be doing in this space. Whether you talk about, mental well-being, or civility and respect, or diversity inclusion, there's probably 6-7 areas that we need to look at this. You could look at it as, okay, let's just talk about being diverse, inclusive, and focus very much on that. Or let's just focus on mental health, or let's just focus on respect. But essentially, and then maybe this is my training, what's the bigger picture here? What's the strategic imperative? Why is this important for either an organization or a business to survive? Because, well, there's a context and demographics, there's movements there we want. So in terms of business is always looking for some sort of stability in the markets, but they also want some sort of stability in society so that businesses can flourish. The second area would be, you could look at diversity, inclusion, and on all of these again in terms of your own team. You know, how do you recruit? How do you develop? How do you have the supports there for them? How do you ensure that they are flourishing in your context? You can think about it as fundamental values. So integrity, respect, being inclusive. But that again, I only see that as, one aspect of this. So I've named three: strategic, the team, and the values. And then how do you actually exercise these in collaboration with partners or stakeholders? There's a different aspect. So the example I gave in how you deal with your clients, whether it's from how do you ensure that they feel included and belonging, that they belong. And then what's new in this space? So I find with any subject, if you're not thinking about, well, I didn't think about it that way, very much what we do in the drinking dialogues. You take a subject and you think you know everything. At the end, you think, oh, I need to think about this a little bit more because I don't know everything. So it's about innovation and thinking about how to tackle something differently. And then lastly, how do you measure this? How do you put this into practice? What resources do you need? How do you make decisions around this? So that would be the sixth area. And then overlaying all of this is how do you engage and communicate any of these aspects? So that's kind of the frame that I use. And for me, it's a very generic, and I put this frame for a leadership development program in my last year. But I find this frame, I didn't realize it actually helps me look at any kind of issue from different angles. And so there's not a gap in how you, learn or have perspectives on a particular subject.
Thank you, Rose. I just want to wish you great luck in this current role, because I think your experiences and background are going to be vital. So moving into the last question, I'm going to start with a quote from Mary Parker Follett from 1918. And she says, "I am an individual not as far as I am a part, but as far as I am a part of other men. Evil is non-relation." And I think that's what you've been talking about throughout, this idea of the non-related, from your story around the hug with the Yukon woman and looking after these isolated IT people and making civility and now the DEI work. It's to try and put relatedness and belongingness into groups and into individuals that don't feel that they belong or feel in a state of non-relation. So sort of summing all that up, if you could, so we argue, Oscar and I, that that organizations lose $9 trillion a year because of poor practices. And let's look at non-relatedness or non-relation as a poor practice. So people don't feel they belong to the team, to the organization, they feel excluded, etc., etc. If you could put all of your work in to solve that problem, what kind of value do you think it's going to create?
Well, there's a place for being intellectual, analytical, using my head. There's a place, I think there's more place that has to be thinking or feeling with your heart. But even beyond that, sort of that next dimension, being part of the whole, and embracing that. And doing that, and you've gotten to know me a little bit better, but I'm a very shy, reserved person. So for me, I know when I'm in this space and creating those connections, I feel I belong, and I feel others belong, and so that is what we need to spend time on. That's the crux. The challenge is the time, the effort, the energy to do this, because so many other things are going on. There's that tension with the operations. There's that tension with, we need to have this deliverable. but you need to make the space to do this, because even if it's a little space, it'll have so many results, exponential results in doing even something little. I still have people saying to me, I always would write a thank you email at the end of the day. And I didn't realize what a huge impact this would be. It would be a couple of words, but those kinds of, think about in little things that we can do every day, those micro behaviors, they have such a rippling effect to creating that sense of belonging and interconnectedness.
From little acorns, mighty oak trees can grow. Thank you, Rose.
Thanks a lot, Rose, for your insight and sharing your experience. Fantastic. Thanks a lot, Rose and Richard. And I hope to see you at the next Drinking Dialogue.